My name is Allison Hart. I'm 36 years old. And this is the story of how I spent a year being ignored, belittled, and betrayed, only to rise in a way no one saw coming. The first time it happened, I told myself it was just a mistake. A simple oversight. I had spent a full month restructuring our vendor contracts at Meriton Systems, personally renegotiating terms that saved the company nearly $2 million annually. When I presented the results to my manager, Daniel Cray, he nodded, smiled that polished executive smile and said, "Great work, Allison. I'll make sure leadership hears about this." I believed him. A week later, at the quarterly town hall, Daniel stood proudly at the podium announcing the team's record-breaking savings. Except, he credited it to someone else. Someone newer. Someone louder. I sat there in the third row, hands folded neatly in my lap, smiling for the cameras while inside. A hollow ache spread slowly through my chest. But I didn't complain. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as the team succeeded. After all, I wasn't doing this for applause. I was doing it because it mattered. Because I believed that quiet, consistent excellence would eventually be seen. That the right people were always noticed in the end. I couldn't have been more wrong. Over the next few months, that ache became a slow, gnawing realization. I kept working late nights, leading initiatives, saving projects from collapse, each time believing that someone somewhere was paying attention. I believed that when the next performance cycle came around, when promotions were announced, when bonuses were distributed, I would finally be recognized. When I received my annual review, I nearly laughed. "Solid contributor," it said in a neatly printed PDF. Solid. Not exceptional. Not irreplaceable. Solid. Like concrete. Like a floor to be walked on. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, rereading the review under the dim light of my ceiling fan, a plate of untouched takeout growing cold beside me. I thought about all the birthday parties I had skipped, all the vacations I had delayed, all the weekends I had given away freely to meet impossible deadlines. I thought about the nights I sat on my couch with my laptop balanced on my knees, typing furiously while my friends posted pictures from wineries and beach trips. And for what? I drafted my first email to Daniel that night. I spent hours writing it. I wasn't emotional. I was meticulous. I listed my contributions in bullet points, included graphs showing the financial impact, referenced client testimonials praising my work. I kept my tone respectful, professional, factual. I didn't demand anything. I requested a salary review in light of my performance. I hit send around midnight, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from hope. I received no reply. First I brushed it off. He must be busy, I reasoned. Give it time. So I waited. A week. Then two. When nothing came, I drafted a second email. Even more precise, even more measured. Silence. That was the beginning of the year of invisible pleas. 37 emails over 12 months. 37 polite, detailed, respectful emails. All of them ignored. Spring turned to summer. Summer bled into fall. Promotions were announced. Fresh college graduates, people who had been at Meriton for less than 18 months, were promoted to roles I had been silently building the foundation for. I remember standing outside the office one October afternoon, the first crisp breeze of autumn curling around me like a warning. I stared up at the glass facade of the building, my reflection distorted and ghostly in the surface, and felt a cold truth settle in my bones. They would never see me if I stayed silent. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. Maybe that's foolishness. Maybe it's strength. I don't know. What I do know is that hope, even when battered and bruised, doesn't die easily. Stubborn. It clings. It refuses to be extinguished. I decided to try one last time. This time not with an email. With my voice. One rainy Thursday afternoon after a team meeting wrapped up, I stayed behind and approached Daniel. He looked up, startled, as if I were an interruption rather than a teammate. I asked if we could schedule a conversation about my role and compensation. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he said, "Of course, Allison. Let's circle back next quarter." Circle back. Next quarter. Empty promises tossed like crumbs to a starving dog. I nodded because what else could I do? Walk out. Cry. Rage. Whoa. Smiled. Turned. I walked back to my desk. But something inside me snapped so softly, so cleanly, I almost didn't feel it at first. That night, I opened a blank document on my laptop. Not a resignation letter. Not yet. No, this was something else. This was a list. A list of everything they had taken from me without ever even realizing it. A list of every late night, every sacrifice, every unseen win. I wrote and wrote until my fingers cramped and the page blurred with tears I hadn't even realized were falling. And then, at the very bottom, I wrote one more line. They don't get to decide my worth. Something shifted in me that night. A decision made not in anger, but in certainty. I would not beg for scraps at a table I had helped build. I would build my own. The following Monday, I started working differently. Outwardly, nothing changed. I was still the first one in and the last one to leave. I still answered every email within minutes. Still took on projects that others sidestepped. If you watched me from the outside, you would think I was still chasing approval. But inside, I wasn't building their future anymore. I was building my exit. Every hour I spent finishing a report or leading a strategy meeting, I spent another hour, often long after sunset, quietly preparing, researching, learning, mapping. I updated my certifications. I started networking under the radar, reaching out to former colleagues, friends, anyone who might know of opportunities that aligned with what I actually deserved. I refined my resume until it was a blade. And most importantly, I started documenting every project I led, every cost I saved, every client I rescued, every initiative that succeeded because I poured myself into it. I built a portfolio so airtight that even the slipperiest executives couldn't poke a hole in it. Meanwhile, Meriton systems continued obliviously. Every week brought fresh indignities, small slights that chipped away at any lingering illusion I had left. Daniel started giving important client-facing projects to junior employees, ones I had trained. They fumbled. They apologized. They looped me back in quietly behind the scenes, asking me to fix it without getting credit. I did. Every time. Not for them. For me. For my name, for my standards. One evening in November, I stayed late to finalize a quarterly strategy plan. The office was nearly empty. Fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. I looked around at the cubicles and glass offices, the place where I had given 12 years of my life, and felt a strange sadness, a mourning for the loyalty I had once had, the belief that had once burned so brightly inside me. I wasn't just preparing to leave a job. I was preparing to leave a version of myself behind. The final spark came 2 weeks before Christmas. At the department holiday party, Daniel stood up to give a speech. The whole team gathered around, holding plastic cups of sparkling cider, forcing polite smiles. Daniel congratulated the department for a record year, rattling off project wins, client expansions, and revenue milestones. My wins, my projects, my milestones. He didn't mention me once. Not once. I stood there, the room blurring slightly around the edges, the voices sounding distant and muffled. It wasn't just the omission. It was the casualness of it. The certainty that I didn't matter enough to even be an afterthought. And in that moment, a part of me went cold and sharp and clear. Smiled. Clapped politely. I even laughed at a few jokes. But when I got home that night, I opened my laptop and drafted 2 documents. One was my official resignation letter. Brief, professional, final. The other was something more powerful. A comprehensive portfolio of my work, including the 37 unanswered emails, the projects I had led without credit, the measurable results I had delivered year after year. I included timestamps, data points, glowing client feedback. I made it undeniable. And then, for the first time in months, I slept deeply, peacefully, without the weight of waiting for permission. The next morning I didn't send anything yet. Well, timing mattered. Precision mattered. If I had learned anything from 12 years at Meriton, it was how to be strategic. First, I booked a meeting with Daniel for the following Friday, 2 weeks before the fiscal year-end review. Then I spent the rest of that week working as diligently as ever. No hint of what was coming. No anger. No coldness. Just professionalism polished to a mirror shine. When Friday arrived, the air in the office was thick with that peculiar December energy, the kind that hums with impending deadlines and last-minute scrambling before the holidays. Daniel waved me into his office with that same effortless arrogance that once intimidated me but now barely registered. He gestured for me to sit across from him. His desk cluttered with reports and coffee cups. "Allison," he said, smiling tightly, "what's on your mind?" I met his gaze steadily. "I just wanted to discuss my role and contributions before year-end evaluations," I said smoothly. "I've compiled a few materials I think you'll find helpful." I slid the folder across the desk. He flipped it open lazily, then froze. For a long moment, the only sound was the muted whir of the HVAC system. His eyes scanned the pages, the color slowly draining from his face. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Everything he had ignored, dismissed, buried, it was all there. Inarguable. Unavoidable. When he finally looked up at me, there was something almost like fear flickering in his expression. He began, but I raised a hand lightly. "I'm not here to debate," I said softly. "I'm here to inform you that I'll be resigning. Effective 2 weeks from today." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. He opened his mouth again, closed it. Tried again. "Allison, wait. Let's not be hasty. No," I said, smiling politely. "Thank you for the opportunities. But I've made my decision." I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out of his office with the same calm, measured steps I had walked into it with. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. As I walked back to my desk, a strange sensation rose in my chest. Something weightless, exhilarating, terrifying. Freedom. Real, terrifying, beautiful freedom. And I wasn't done yet. Because Daniel wasn't the only one who needed to see what had been hidden. And when I hit send that afternoon, when my resignation and the attached portfolio landed not just in Daniel's inbox, but in the inboxes of the CEO, the CFO, and the head of HR, I knew the storm was only just beginning. And this time it would have my name on it. The emails had barely landed before the ripple effect began. At first, there was only silence, the heavy, waiting kind, thick with unsaid things. I went about my work as usual, answering emails, attending meetings, handing off projects with meticulous notes for whoever would inherit them. No one said anything directly. But people watched me now, their eyes lingering too long when I walked by, conversations halting when I entered a room. By Monday morning, the energy in the office had shifted completely. The executive floor buzzed like a disturbed hive. Daniel barely looked at me during the department meeting. His hands clenched so tightly on his notepad that the edges of the pages crumpled. His smile, once effortless, now seemed plastered on with trembling hands. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. Because it wasn't about revenge. It was about truth finally, blessedly, speaking for itself. At 10:17 a.m., I received a calendar invite for a leadership alignment meeting from the CEO's assistant. Private. Urgent. Mandatory. I accepted it without hesitation. When I stepped into the sleek, glass-walled conference room later that afternoon, the atmosphere was suffocating. The CEO, Mr. Granger, sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Beside him were the CFO, the head of HR, and at the far end, Daniel, his face pale, his posture stiff. "Allison," Mr. Granger said, his voice measured, "thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." I sat down, folding my hands calmly in my lap, feeling every pair of eyes in the room pinned to me. "I'll be direct," Mr. Granger continued. "Your resignation email and the attached documentation was thorough, compelling, and frankly deeply concerning." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I want to personally apologize," he said. "What you endured was unacceptable. It reflects a failure of leadership at multiple levels." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair but said nothing. "We would like to make things right," the CEO went on. Effective immediately, we are offering you a promotion to Senior Vice President of Operational Strategy, with a substantial raise and a direct line of reporting to me. The words hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Once not long ago I might have leapt for it. Once I would have felt my heart race, my hands sweat, my soul scream, finally. But now, I felt nothing but a deep, bone-deep certainty. I smiled politely. "Thank you for the offer," I said softly. "I appreciate it. But I'm afraid my decision remains unchanged." A flicker of surprise crossed Mr. Granger's face, quickly masked by corporate professionalism. "If I may ask," he said carefully, "is there anything we could do to change your mind?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I spent 12 years giving this company everything I had," I said, my voice steady. "I worked late nights. I saved millions. Built teams. I asked respectfully again and again for recognition, not applause, just fairness. And I was met with silence." I let the words hang there, sharp and undeniable. "I'm not leaving because I wasn't promoted. I'm leaving because I realized I don't need to wait for someone else to tell me what I'm worth." Silence. Heavy. Full. I rose slowly from my chair, gathering my folder, my keys, my dignity. "Thank you again for the opportunity," I said. "But it's time for me to build something of my own." Without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked out. Behind me, Daniel's career was already beginning to crumble, the cracks spiderwebbing out from the foundation he had built on convenience, cowardice, and neglect. And I was already gone. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, the city spread out before me in a glittering tapestry of lights and possibility. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about what tomorrow would bring. I wasn't waiting for someone to choose me. I had already chosen myself. The next few weeks passed in a strange, golden blur. I finished my final projects with precision and pride. I trained my replacements without bitterness, pouring everything I had learned into clean documentation and thoughtful guidance. Not because Meriton deserved it, but because I did. Because I refused to let their smallness dictate the size of my spirit. Colleagues I barely knew started reaching out quietly. Messages of support, regret, even admiration trickling into my inbox. "I had no idea," one whispered. "You deserved so much better," another wrote. It didn't change what had happened, but it mattered somehow. My last day came on a rainy Friday. No party, no cake, just a few polite handshakes and awkward smiles. Daniel didn't even show up. I didn't mind. His absence was more fitting than any empty words he could have offered. I gathered the last of my things into a single cardboard box. Photos, awards, a few plants, and walked through the glass lobby one final time. No fanfare, no parade, just freedom. I stepped out into the rain, lifted my face to the sky and smiled. Because I wasn't losing anything. I was reclaiming everything. The Monday after I left Meriton Systems, I woke up to a strange, exhilarating sensation. No alarms blaring, no Monday dread curling in my stomach like smoke. Just silence, spacious and unfamiliar. For the first time in over a decade, my time belonged to me. I made coffee slowly, savoring the ritual, standing barefoot in my kitchen as the winter light filtered through the windows. The world outside was cold and gray, but inside something was blooming, something warm and fierce. It would have been easy to take a few weeks off, to rest, to breathe. But I had spent too many years waiting for life to notice me. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I wasn't going to lose momentum now. That afternoon, I pulled out the notebook where I had scribbled my secret plans during those last miserable months at Meriton. Ideas, contacts, possibilities. I wasn't starting from scratch. I had been quietly, meticulously preparing for this moment without even realizing it. By Thursday, I had 3 interviews lined up. Not for lateral roles. Not for another mid-level position where I would be solid but invisible. No, I was aiming higher. Executive roles, strategy positions, consulting offers where my expertise wasn't just a footnote but the headline. And something else too. Something deeper. I started outlining a plan for a consultancy of my own. I wasn't just looking for a new job. I was building an empire, one brick at a time. The offers started coming faster than I had expected. People I hadn't spoken to in years were forwarding my name, recommending me, reaching out with opportunities. It turned out, quietly being excellent for over a decade had built a reputation I hadn't even realized was rippling outward. By the end of January, I had 3 solid offers on the table. The best came from a mid-sized tech firm on the rise, known for valuing operational excellence and real leadership, not just flash and politics. They offered me the role of Chief Strategy Officer, reporting directly to the CEO. The salary package was nearly double what I had ever earned at Meriton. Stock options, signing bonus, full autonomy to build out my own team. Accepted. With one condition. I wanted to bring my own people. Not many, just a handful. People I knew were quietly brilliant, overlooked like I had been, trapped in roles that didn't see them. I reached out to 3 former colleagues from Meriton, people I trusted, people who had survived the same indifferent system I had. When I offered them a chance to join me, to build something real together, they said yes without hesitation. We didn't just join a company. We started a movement inside it. Within 3 months, our division was outperforming projections by 30%. Clients raved. Departments that had been stuck in bureaucratic sludge started moving like well-oiled machines. New hires fought to transfer into our team. Upper leadership started using words like transformational and next-generation leadership when they talked about us. And Meriton started bleeding talent. One by one, people started leaving. Some followed me. Some just left because they realized, finally, that staying meant being invisible. Daniel tried to plug the holes with flashy hires and desperate promotions. Didn't work. The foundation he had built on neglect and favoritism was crumbling fast, and everyone could see it. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Success was its own quiet, undeniable echo. But the real twist, the moment that still feels like something out of a storybook, came 6 months later. I was invited to a regional leadership summit, a gathering of CEOs, COs, CSOs, and top-tier executives from across the state. It was the kind of event where deals were whispered over cocktails and careers were quietly made, or broken. I was there as a keynote speaker. The topic: building cultures of recognition and sustainable excellence. As I stood backstage waiting to be introduced, skimming my notes one last time, I heard a familiar voice across the room. I turned, and there he was. Daniel Cray. Badge slung around his neck. Drink clutched tightly in his hand. Lone. Older. Smaller somehow. Like a suit a size too big. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just watched as his eyes scanned the room and then froze on me. Recognition flickered, followed by something that almost looked like regret or fear. I turned back to the stage manager as my name was called. I walked out under the lights, applause rising around me. And Daniel, he sat in the crowd. He sat there and listened as I spoke about leadership, about recognizing quiet excellence, about valuing the people who build the true foundations, not just the ones who shout the loudest, about how neglect isn't just cruel, it's unsustainable. I didn't say his name. I didn't have to. The truth spoke louder than any accusation ever could. When the speech ended and people lined up to shake my hand, to ask me questions, to offer me partnerships and speaking engagements, Daniel faded away into the crowd like a ghost. That night, as I sat in a corner of the reception hall, sipping a glass of champagne someone had handed me, I thought about the years I had spent waiting for someone like Daniel to validate me. And I realized I had never needed his permission to shine. I only needed my own. In the weeks after the summit, something even more extraordinary began to unfold. The connections I made that night weren't fleeting handshakes or empty promises. They were seeds, planted in fertile ground. Executives from industries I had never even worked in reached out, asking me to consult, to advise, to help them build what I had built. Invitations poured in for speaking engagements, strategy retreats, leadership panels. The consultancy I had dreamed of during those lonely late nights at Meriton. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was real. It was growing faster than I had ever dared to imagine. By late summer, I had formally launched my own firm, Heart Strategic Solutions. Within 3 months, we had 5 full-time employees, dozens of client accounts, and a waiting list 3 months long. We weren't just consulting, we were transforming companies from the inside out, teaching them how to recognize and retain true talent before it slipped through their fingers. I should have been overwhelmed. Instead, I felt something entirely different. Alive. Energized. As if the years I had spent invisible were now propelling me forward with unstoppable momentum. Meanwhile, Meriton continued its slow, public unraveling. The cracks Daniel had tried to plaster over with hollow speeches and rushed promotions had deepened. Their quarterly earnings were down. Client retention rates plummeted. Glassdoor reviews started painting an ugly, undeniable picture of life behind their polished facade. One day, out of pure curiosity, I checked LinkedIn. Daniel's profile had quietly changed. He was no longer listed as a director. No glowing announcement. No triumphant farewell. Just a blank space where his title had once been. Later, I heard through old contacts that he had been quietly asked to step down. A mutual decision, the press release said. But those who knew the truth. He hadn't been fired for one mistake. He had been fired for a pattern. A pattern I had exposed not through anger or vengeance, but by simply refusing to stay silent. I thought I would feel vindicated. I thought I would savor it. But the truth, I just felt free. I had spent too long living under the shadow of needing someone else's downfall to validate my worth. Now, standing firmly in the life I had built with my own hands, I realized that his fall was irrelevant to my rise. It wasn't about him. It had never been about him. It was about me. Choosing myself. Over and over again. One crisp October afternoon, almost exactly a year after I had sent that first ignored email asking for a raise, I found myself standing in a sun-drenched corner office overlooking the city skyline. My office. My name on the door. My team bustling outside, laughing, collaborating, thriving. I had just finished a meeting with a Fortune 500 client, and as I leaned against the cool glass, sipping my coffee, a memory flickered through my mind. The image of myself sitting at that scratched-up desk at Meriton, drafting yet another desperate, hopeful email that would be swallowed by silence. If I could have reached through time, I would have taken that woman's hand in mine and whispered, "You're not invisible. They just don't know how to see you. But you will. You will." Later that evening, I stayed late in the office after everyone had gone home. I wandered the halls slowly, pausing to look at the framed mission statement hanging by the door. We see the unseen. We hear the unheard. We honor the builders. It wasn't just words. It was the battle cry of every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. It was mine. And it was real. As I locked up for the night, I stepped out into the cool autumn air. The city buzzed around me. Honking taxis, flashing lights, the endless churn of life moving forward. I pulled my coat tighter around me. Not to shield against the cold, but to savor it. To remember how it felt to stand here, not as someone begging to be seen, but as someone who had seen herself, fully, fiercely, and chosen to build a life worthy of that vision. At the crosswalk, as I waited for the light to change, a young woman in a sharp navy suit glanced over and smiled. "Hey," she said hesitantly. "Weren't you the keynote speaker at the summit a few months ago?" I blinked, surprised, then laughed softly. "Yes, that was me." "You were incredible," she said, her voice sincere. "You made me believe I could leave my old company." I did. And it's the best decision I ever made. The light changed. We crossed together side by side. I didn't ask her name. I didn't need to. Because I knew in that moment that the ripples of the life I had reclaimed were reaching farther than I could ever have imagined. And somewhere someone else was choosing themselves too. 'Cause they had seen me choose. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all. Winter crept back into the city with its muted palette of gray skies and glittering frost. As the year wound down, I found myself reflecting more often than ever. Not with regret, but with a profound, almost aching gratitude for everything I had endured. Pain sharpens you. Betrayal reveals you. And silence. Silence teaches you the sound of your own voice. One December evening, as the first snow dusted the sidewalks, I hosted our firm's first annual celebration. Not a stiff corporate party. A real celebration of the people who had built this dream with me, brick by invisible brick. We gathered in a cozy loft space filled with warm lights and long tables. Laughter bounced off the exposed brick walls. There were toasts made not to numbers or awards, but to each other, to late nights and crazy ideas and the courage to believe we deserved more. I stood up near the end of the evening, holding a glass of champagne that trembled just slightly in my hand. "I want to say something," I said, and the room fell instantly, lovingly quiet. I swallowed against the sudden tightness in my throat. Not sadness, no. Something richer. Something fuller. "I spent a lot of years waiting for someone else to recognize my value," I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "I thought if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, waited long enough, that one day someone would finally see me." I paused, meeting the eyes of the people who had chosen to stand beside me, not because they were forced to, but because they believed. But the truth is, the most important recognition doesn't come from a boss or a title or a paycheck. Comes from within. It comes the day you stop asking for permission to matter. I raised my glass. To all of you, for never asking for permission again. The cheers that erupted filled the space, shaking the cold right off the windows. That night, as I walked home under a sky thick with stars, my breath clouding the air in front of me, I thought about the Allison Hart who had once sat trembling at her kitchen table, pouring her heart into unanswered emails. And I realized she hadn't been weak. She had been planting seeds. Seeds that had finally, beautifully, broken through the frozen ground. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected email. Subject line: Request for consultation, Meriton Systems. I sat there for a long time just staring at it. Apparently, the new leadership team had heard about Hart Strategic Solutions. Their internal culture was collapsing, and client defections were accelerating. They were desperate for help rebuilding trust, re-establishing credibility, turning the ship before it sank completely. The irony was so thick it almost made me laugh. They didn't know, of course. The request had come through their new director of organizational development, a woman who had joined after my time, who had no idea of the history tangled between me and Meriton's halls. I closed the laptop without responding. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. You don't rebuild your future by dragging the ruins of your past behind you. Instead, I wrote a short, polite email declining the request, citing full client capacity. No explanation. No anger. No reopening of old wounds. Just a quiet, firm closing of a door I had already walked through. That spring, as our firm expanded into new cities, new sectors, new dreams, I finally understood something I had once struggled to grasp. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction. It's thriving. It's rising so high that those who once tried to bury you become nothing but a distant speck below. Not because you hate them, but because you've outgrown them. One afternoon in May, I found myself sitting at a cafe near the river, a rare free hour between meetings. I sipped iced coffee and scribbled ideas in a worn leather journal I always carried now. Plans for a leadership academy we were launching, scholarships for young professionals overlooked by traditional paths. And across from me, at a nearby table, a young woman tapped anxiously on her laptop, frustration creasing her brow. Her voice carried faintly to me as she muttered under her breath, "I don't know if they'll even see this, but I have to try." I smiled softly. I didn't know her story, but I knew the feeling. The hope, the fear, the courage it took just to keep trying in a world that so often looked past you. When she got up to leave, I caught her eye and said, "They may not see it yet, but keep going. You're building something even if you can't see it yet." She blinked, surprised, then smiled, a slow, real smile that lit up her whole face, and whispered, "Thank you." She hurried out into the golden afternoon, leaving a trail of possibility in her wake. I turned back to my journal, the pages fluttering in the soft breeze. And somewhere deep inside I felt it again. That quiet, indestructible flame. The one they had tried to smother. The one that refused to die. The one that had built all of this. The day I realized I had truly, completely moved on came unexpectedly. It wasn't during a big celebration or after signing a major client. It wasn't even when I saw my name featured in a business magazine under the headline, "The Quiet Force Redefining Leadership." It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. I was walking through the farmer's market, carrying a bag of sun-warmed tomatoes and fresh bread, when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it, but habit won. It was a message from someone I hadn't thought about in months. Daniel Cray. Short, awkward, half apology, half job inquiry. He said he was consulting now. Freelance. Struggling to rebuild after marathon. Heard about Heart Strategic Solutions. Wondered if I might have openings. Suggested we could put the past behind us. I stood there, sunlight warming my face, laughter and music threading through the morning air. And I smiled, not with bitterness but with something gentler. Easier. Because I finally understood. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself move forward, free of the chains they tried to lock you in. I deleted the message without replying. Not out of cruelty. Out of peace. Out of a deep, soul-level certainty that some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. Later that afternoon, I sat on a park bench overlooking the river, watching kids sail paper boats across the water, the bright triangles bobbing and twirling in the breeze. And I thought about all the invisible battles we fight, all the small choices that shape us, all the quiet rebellions we mount when no one is watching. Choosing yourself isn't one big, cinematic moment. It's 1,000 small ones. It's every time you get back up when you're overlooked. Every time you say, "I deserve better," even when your voice trembles. Every time you refuse to let someone else's blindness define your brilliance. That's what builds a life worth living. Not revenge. Not applause. But relentless, unshakable self-respect. A year later, Heart Strategic Solutions was ranked among the top 5 boutique consultancies in the region. We expanded into leadership coaching, published a best-selling guide on authentic recognition in the workplace, and launched scholarships for first-generation college graduates. But the best thing, the ripple effect. Clients who once struggled to retain talent began transforming their cultures, promoting unseen talent, building teams where the quiet brilliance was finally seen and celebrated. And every time I saw it, every time I saw someone who reminded me of the woman I used to be finally standing in their light, it felt like the final stitch in a wound long healed. I wasn't just building a career anymore. I was building a legacy. A blueprint for anyone who had ever whispered to themselves in the dark, "I know I'm worth more than this." 'Cause you are. You always were. You don't need to wait for them to see it. You can see it yourself. You can choose yourself. And when you do, when you finally stop waiting and start walking, you'll realize something beautiful. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. And your real life, it's been waiting for you all along. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever waited for recognition that never came, let this story be your reminder. You don't need permission to matter. You already do. Claim it. Own it. Build it. The world doesn't change because you ask nicely. Changes because you finally decide that your voice, your story, your worth are too powerful to be ignored. Walk away from the tables where you're not seen, and build your own. Because trust me, the view from your own table, it's worth everything. Your worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. It's defined by how fiercely you see yourself, and what you build once you stop waiting for permission. Respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you embody. If you found strength in Allison's story, don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more powerful journeys of resilience, triumph, and self-respect. Leave a comment sharing your own moment of choosing yourself. You never know who might find courage in your words. And please share this story with someone who needs the reminder. You are enough. You always have been.